Hello everyone. So we're going to look at this 40 marker today for crime. It's discussed the role of police in controlling crime in the UK, and it came up in 2012. So discuss the role of police in controlling crime in the UK. What makes this question incredibly hard, I think it's probably the hardest question I think on any of the papers, is it doesn't fall into our structure of having usefulness terms like contributions, explanations, reasons, or says usefulness. And it doesn't say view, extent, may. It gives you it doesn't follow that formula at all. So it doesn't give you any indication on whether you should do it as a usefulness. So 1, 2, 3, 4, listing 6 paragraphs down, if it's the kind of usefulness question, or whether it's got view, may, extent to do 6, 1, 4, 1 against, 1, 4, 1 against, 1, 4, 1 against. So it's really, really, really hard. The way I approach this is I see the question, and for some reason I really don't want the other one. This is the one that I've chosen to do. And again, go through the grids. It's also really hard because it doesn't tell you what grid it is. It doesn't say functionalism. It doesn't say Marxism. It's really hard to access what the question wants with this one. Because it's the role of police, I don't see any of that in the functionalist grid. In Marxism, really, interactionism, it's all really about focusing on how the police amplify deviance, or how the police don't do what they should be doing in terms of crime and deviance for Marxism. So functionalism's gone, Marxism's gone, interactionism's gone, which leaves me now with right realism. And right realism dominantly focuses on crime prevention via CCTV target hardening. So I'm going to start with looking at right realism, and I'm going to see whether right realism will give me 6 paragraphs on the role of police, whether I can do 6 down the page and then go from there. So paragraph 1, so the role of police in controlling crime, or the role of police to control crime, can take place via target hardening. So the role of police to control crime can take place via target hardening. So there I'm going to do Clark advocated target hardening. So Clark advocated target hardening. The preemptive identification and targeting of likely pockets of crime and criminal groups. Clark advocated target hardening, the preemptive identification and targeting of likely pockets of crime and criminal groups. This is a practical approach to reduce crime. A practical approach to reduce crime. He also argued that there are 3 types of criminals. There is opportunistic, supplementary, and professional. There are 3 types of criminals: opportunistic, supplementary, and professional. Target hardening will impact on the first 2 and is more effective than increasing punishments. Okay, so Clark. Then when I'm doing the this shows, so I'm going to say this shows the police's role to reduce crime is to target areas and groups who are more criminal. The police's role to reduce crime is to target areas and groups who are more criminal. This is a preemptive measure. This is a preemptive measure and can ensure no crime takes place. The role of police to reduce crime is to target areas and groups who are more criminal. This is a preemptive measure and can ensure no crime takes place. So it ensures no crime takes place and can therefore control crime. So the role of police to reduce crime is to target areas and groups who are more criminal. It's a preemptive measure that ensures no crime takes place and therefore crime is controlled, or ensures that we control crime as no crime takes place at all. So that's how the police control crime. Their role is to control crime by targeting areas or groups. Okay. However, the police are no longer exempt, rightfully so, but they're no longer exempt from the Race Relations Act. So post Stephen Lawrence, however, I might put post Stephen, post the kind of Lawrence inquiry, the police are no longer exempt from the Race Relations Act. They can no longer target or use ethnicity or race. The police are no longer exempt from the Race Relations Act. And target hardening justifies institutional racism. If you're saying the likely criminal groups, statistically, it appears, and be very careful of those stats, statistically you should target young men who are working class, who are disproportionately black. It justifies, target hardening justifies institutional racism. And furthermore, Gilroy notes that black criminality is a myth. It's a complete myth. And again, it's used to justify saturation policing, furthermore, Gilroy notes that black criminality is a complete myth, used to justify saturation policing, and therefore police don't control crime, they merely target groups of colour. Trying to link it back to the question. Post the Lawrence inquiry, police are no longer exempt from the Race Relations Act. You can't ask police officers their role to target areas or particular groups. It justifies institutional racism. And Gilroy notes that black criminality is a complete myth anyway. It's used to justify saturation policing. And therefore the police don't control crime. They're merely target groups of colour. So basically, not an effective role. When I'm in the the realism grid, the next or an alternative new right is Clark and Coleman, who argue that we need to increase the costs of crime. So for paragraph 2, we're going to argue that the role of police to control crime in the UK is to increase the costs or punishments. The role of police to control crime in the UK is to increase the costs or punishments. So in this paragraph, for Clark and Coleman, Clark and Coleman developed rational choice theory and found that human nature is naturally self-interested. It's naturally self-interested. So the solution to reduce crime is for police to increase the costs and reduce any benefits of crime. Increase the cost and reduce the benefits of any crimes. Therefore, they advocate, use that a lot for you're right, they advocate both corporal and capital punishment. Discuss the role of police in controlling crime. Role of police to control crime is to increase the costs. We're going to put Clark and Coleman in there. So this shows, check the question, discuss the role of police in controlling crime. So this shows the police's role to reduce crime. The police's role to reduce crime is to impose corporal and capital punishments. Their job, their role is to impose both corporal and capital punishments on criminals. This will control crime as it acts as a deterrent to others and will therefore reduce crime taking place in future. It's like a two-part, this one. It's like you're clear, or you're giving the examiner what the police's role is to reduce crime. So their role is to carry out corporal and capital punishments, and it therefore will control crime because it will act as a deterrent as a result. So it's almost like, again, role of police is one part of it and how it will control crime. On so many levels, this question is really, really hard. So that's also why I'm going through it. Sometimes with some of the previous questions, which is why it's so important that we go through as many of them as possible, sometimes they're so challenging that as long as you've seen them and you're clear about how to approach them, then you're fine. Others are a bit more accessible. This one, definitely not. So, however, using capital punishment to control crime has limited, using capital punishment to control hard crime has limited evidence to suggest it is effective. For example, in Texas, which has capital punishment, it has the highest crime rate of any state in the US. Appreciate it's a very large state, but the point is that Texas has capital punishment and it has one of the highest crime rates in the US. Therefore, it clearly doesn't control crime. all work as a deterrent. So we're trying to connect those together. Clearly not controlling crime if it's actually, as a state, got one of the highest crime rates. I've obviously gone to role of police here. Okay, that's paragraph 2. Other new right thinkers that I have, so then I've got Wilson and Kelling and Wilson. So when I'm in the exam and I'm planning this in the exam, I'm structuring it 1 to 6. So I can do 6 paragraphs of what the role is, how it controls crime. If I can do this, 1 paragraph, 2nd paragraph, 3rd paragraph, then I'll stick with it. If it's not working and I'm running out of room, if I only get to 3 paragraphs, then I might be forced to go against and debate it. That's why it's so important you plan as well. So paragraph 3, the role of police to control crime is to address incivilities. Quite like that word. Role of police to control crime is to address incivilities. For Wilson, paragraph 4, Wilson and Kelling developed broken window thesis. They developed broken window thesis that we need a balance in all communities of law abiding and offenders. In all communities, we need a balance of both law-abiding citizens and offenders. Minor acts are a visual reminder. Minor acts are a visual reminder or a signal of a downward spiral. For Wilson, I'm putting them together because I struggle to see how I can make Wilson say something different to Wilson and Kelling. And when I separated them out, because I did originally do that, I could not think of a different criticism for the two of them. So because I couldn't do that, I've pushed them together. So for Wilson, he argues that the police need to ensure zero tolerance. The police need to ensure zero tolerance. That minor, again, because this theme is incivilities, that minor incivilities need to be taken seriously and punished. Again, talking about preventing a spiral there. These paragraphs are quite short in terms of content, but you have to be quite selective with who you're using. So this shows, again, I need to try and write role of police. Their role is to address incivilities and it will control crime because it will prevent a spiral. So this shows that the role of police in controlling crime is to address all incivilities. I think there I'm going to put littering, graffiti. Littering, graffiti, noise levels. The police must address incivilities. They've got to address littering, graffiti, noise levels to control crime and prevent a spiral of more extreme and dangerous acts of crime. The role of police in controlling crime is to address those acts. Zero tolerance to littering, graffiti, noise levels to control crime and prevent a spiral of more extreme and dangerous acts of crime. This shows what their role is They address everything low level. It prevents a spiral, prevents crime from getting worse. However, right, I really struggled with this evaluation. If you've got any better evaluation in your grid, please let me know or change it. I really struggled. So what I put here is however, and I'm going to try not to just juxtapose them. So however, for Snyder, this is detracting or distracting, I think I should say. This is distracting attention away from real and very serious crime from large corporations. This is distracting attention away from real and very serious crime from real and serious crime. The new right, or I should put Wilson and Kelling are suggesting police should focus on working class people littering. For Snyder, this is distracting attention away from real and very serious crime. I might have stolen that from someone in Interactionism, might be Akers actually. Wilson and Kelling are suggesting police should focus on working class people littering. But the most serious acts of crime, now you might see how you remember her, are committed by large corporations. And the police's role should be to address this. I mean, I hate littering. Like it's, not good. It really agitates me. However, if I was going to pick between a person littering versus tax evasion, tax avoidance, the destruction of the environment, unnecessary sugar fat added to product, like the most serious acts of crime are committed by large corporations, and the police's role should be addressing this, not looking at littering, to be quite frank. So that's how I've used her and kind of forced her into the debate, really. I was quite tricky with that one, I felt. Okay, so paragraph 4 then. For paragraph 4, I know Murray's the first in the grid, but I kind of held off for him because I felt like most of the time he's talking about the underclass, which we don't want to spend most of the examiner's time talking about the underclass because they don't really link to the role. So for paragraph 4, for Murray, the role of police is to ensure CCTV. You have to ensure for police the use of CCTV and to catch and convict all criminals. So for Murray, the role of police is to ensure that we have CCTV and therefore to catch and convict all criminals. I'm going to do a tiny bit of the underclass because otherwise it's not even going to be a paragraph. It's going to be like one line. The underclass are responsible for a rise in crime. They have deviant, subcultural values. Underclass are responsible for a rise in crime. They have deviant subcultural values where acquiring money is separate from acquiring money is separate from work. Marriage is separate from childbearing. And I might prove, and men prove masculinity through violence. I suppose you could put the point about marriage being separate from childbearing if you wanted to. I'm trying to focus in a little bit on crime. Don't know why I got an issue with people not being married, but there. I'll do those two. For Murray, to reduce crime, or let's use the terms of the question, to control crime, we need the certainty of getting caught, and secondly, severe punishment. We need the certainty of getting caught with CCTV and severe punishment. Again, quite short. This shows the role of police. Check the question. The role of police in controlling crime. So the role of police to control crime is to ensure effective CCTV, and to ensure we have effective CCTV, to ensure higher convictions. And this will control crime as people will not have the opportunity to commit crime without punishment. The role of police is to ensure that there is CCTV and therefore higher convictions. And this will control crime as people will not have the opportunity to commit crime without being punished. Without being punished. Okay? Again, it's coming back to both what their role is, CCTV everywhere, and then how that will control crime. I think the more you go through it and keep coming back to the question, with this question, it seems like a lot more of my time was taken up making sure I was addressing the question rather than the knowledge, to be quite frank. However, I called upon some postmodernism here because when I wrote this, I remembered that most CCTV now isn't really the state. However, I went to postmodernism. For Foucault, it is private companies. It's now private companies that have replaced police's role. It's private companies that have replaced police's monitoring role, I think. The police's monitoring role. This highlights that Murray and New Right are outdated, as they are not aware that police no longer perform this role of monitoring. This is now performed by private companies. That actually makes it very difficult for the police. So if Facebook kind of are unwilling or unable to get involved, they need to monitor practices, but don't want to kind of deal with some of the repercussions. So for Foucault, it's completely out of date. I'm not doing there Cashmore or Jones because it's not relevant. I know I've briefly mentioned underclass, but the question is asking you how helpful is he really in understanding the role of police to reduce crime, rather than talking about the underclass. So again, quite a lot of this essay is about being quite reserved and being quite selective. So you're not throwing everything at it. You've got to be a bit slow and a bit steadier, which is probably where the time would be taken up with this question. Okay, that's paragraph 4. Because I'm on to paragraph 4, it makes me think that it is almost like a listy usefulness question and not a debate. So I would have had the opportunity to go against if I'd left with only, say, 3 paragraphs, and I thought that's just nowhere near enough. Excuse me. And then I think to myself, so I've done right realism, but then in fairness, left realism also offers what the police's role is or should be to control crime in the UK. So then I always do it in the order of the grids. So we'll do Kingsley, Lear and Young, or left realism here. So for the role of police should be to work with communities. Should be working with communities. For Kingsley, it's just left reading, but kind of on a roll here. For Kingsley, Lear and Young, the police need to create and maintain good communication with local communities. The police should create and maintain good communication with local communities. It is the public who both report and provide evidence. It's the public who both report and provide evidence. They are a vital resource that ensures crime is both detected and convicted, because they provide evidence. The public provides evidence that ensures someone gets convicted, and it's the public who reports it that helps police detect and convict. They're crucial. So for Jock Young, he's kind of on his own when he said this, or Young, I don't know, I kind of just think his first name. We've previously had, I think maybe we still do, previously had a policing problem where there's been they've over policed soft drug use. No one's advocating, but there's been an over policing of very soft drug use. An over policing of soft drug use, but an under policing of hate crime. So for groups of colour, domestic violence, and corporate and white collar crime. There's been an issue within our policing. There's been an over policing of very soft drug use from young people, but an under policing of hate crime, domestic violence, and both corporate and white collar crime. The police's role is to act on the community's instruction, and therefore, no, I might come back to that. Their job is to basically act on our instruction. What are the issues and concerns of the community? Now, I'll see what I'm doing. So this will improve the detection rates. I might come back to that because that's about controlling crime. This will improve detection rates, which are currently, horrifyingly, the detection rates are currently at 29%. I might use that in this shows. I'm going to see, I'll pop it in kind of a colour to come back to it. So this shows the role of police. This shows the role of police in controlling crime is to work with communities. Their role is to work with the communities. This will control crime as it will increase detection and convictions, and reduce the marginalization caused by right realist policy. So the role of police in controlling crime is to work with communities. This will control crime as it will increase detections and convictions and reduce the marginalization caused by new right policy. I'll explain. So their role is to work with communities. That's their job. This controls crime because they will be able to detect crimes. They will be able to convict criminals. And therefore, maybe I need a bit more there. And therefore, sorry if you've typed it or handwritten it. And therefore, offenders won't be able to reoffend. I think it needs a bit more. They won't be able to reoffend as they won't be able to reoffend as they will be incarcerated and unable to. Incarcerated as they will be incarcerated and unable to. This will also reduce the marginalisation felt as a result of new right policy. It's probably more of a conclusion, but I can't maybe resist. Evaluation. I think incarceration is an American term, but I didn't want to put in prison. But I sounded a bit more fancy with incarcerated. So the role is they work with communities. It controls crime because now those people have got convictions and therefore they can't reoffend. They're just unable to because they're no longer in the community causing horrific acts of hate crime. However, again, this was insane to try and evaluate and really hard. So, however, left realism kind of fails to account for the underlying structural. They fail to kind of account for the underlying structural inequalities. They fail to account for the underlying structural inequalities. Structural inequalities that cause the previous, they fail to account for the underlying structural inequalities that cause previous policy to marginalise. They fail to account for the underlying structural inequalities that cause previous policy to have marginalised and disguised crime statistics. They kind of fail to acknowledge or account for the kind of structural inequalities that have caused previous policy to marginalise and disguise or skew crime stats. That covert racism is what has caused, or that covert racism is what underlines, or what is beneath a lot of policy, a lot of previous policy based on target hardening. I just don't think it maybe goes enough in terms of identifying. I mean, it does, to be fair, but it doesn't maybe go as far enough to identify the previous policy has been built on structural inequalities that have been quite happy for kind of upper middle class privileged white men to say this is who we should target. Let's target the working class, let's target people of colour, let's target this area. That there's structural inequalities that have caused previous policy to skew those stats, and then we get to justify, well, of course we should target that group, they're more criminal, because for many years policy has been allowed to target those groups, or not just allowed to, it's been police's role to target that group. Therefore all of the crime prevention stuff is built on structural inequalities. I hope that makes sense. So I've got 5 paragraphs, which by this point in the exam I think that's enough. 5 paragraphs is a good old amount. So in my conclusion then, I'm going to say, I'm sure this is no surprise, that the police's role to reduce crime is to work with. Oh, that's what I was going to say, sorry. I would also consider, because this is a bigger paragraph, maybe putting that at the top. I always follow the order of the grid, but when you planned it and you find that maybe you want the chunkiest paragraphs, move them to the top. But if you knew you had time, it's fine. The role of police to reduce crime is to work with communities. This will ensure that underreported crimes, underreported and recorded crimes like hate crime and domestic violence and white collar are tackled. The police's role is to reduce crime, is to work with communities. It will ensure that underreported and underrecorded crimes like hate crime and domestic violence and white collar crime are tackled. It will support victims. It will support victims and improve detection rates from 29%. This highlights that new right methods have clearly not effectively controlled crime. It highlights to me, without saying I, that their detection, their rates of controlling crime clearly haven't worked. It hasn't effectively controlled crime, particularly in most recent years. I mean, it might be expensive to use that strategy in terms of the role of police, but it's clearly, I think, what's needed. This might be an expensive way to try and control crime. However, it's fundamentally needed and might be a role that the police welcome. Let's try something new. Maybe I'll put that. We should try something different. We should try something different from new right policy. That's my judgment. That's based on all of those arguments. That's fundamentally this sociologist's conclusion. When I say my opinion, what I think, it's the judgment it's the judgment one has reached, I think is what we'd say. In the introduction, so we've discussed the role of police in controlling crime. So some have argued the way police can control crime is via target hardening, enforcing corporal and capital punishments, and addressing all low-level crime or all low-level incivilities. Litter, graffiti, vandalism. However, this may have had limited, this may have not controlled crime as much as working with communities to control crimes experienced by marginalised groups, e.g. women, people of colour, and LGBTQ+. However, this might not have controlled crime as much as working with communities to control crime experienced by marginalised groups like women, people of colour, and LGBTQ+. So yeah, I hope that has kind of made it clearer, hopefully very clear, or crystal clear is what I'm aiming for, on how to approach this 40 marker. Yeah, hopefully you think, yep, that's perfect. I hope that I get that in the summer. I'll be able to tackle that. As always, if you have any questions at all, please let me know. Thank you.